Hello, I'm Jan Szerewiński and you're watching Eastern Express. Welcome, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. On this episode, we're talking about Russia's war economy. Yes, the numbers seem both impossibly confusing and hilariously grim, but trust me, there is a deeper story here. Russia's war economy isn't the unbreakable machine it claims to be. It's more like a car running on fumes. It can keep going for a while, but eventually it will stall. So, why does Moscow go deeper into the dark instead of correcting course? And why would ending the war right here not be the end of the Kremlin's woes? Without further ado, let's take a look at the latest report to find out more.
The International Monetary Fund says that Russia's economy is not only falling behind most developed nations, but also its BRICS partners. By next year, Russia's growth will lag one-third behind developed countries and be 3 times slower than developing nations. It will trail China by a factor of 3.5 and India by 5. According to the latest IMF projections, the country's GDP growth will slow dramatically from 3.6% this year to just 1.3% in 2025 and further declining to 1.2% by 2029. Key factors driving the slowdown include declining private consumption, a lack of investment, and a severe labor shortage. The Kremlin estimates a gap of 2.5 million workers, but independent experts suggest this deficit could be as large as 5 million, a result of war-driven mobilizations and emigration. Adding to the strain, falling oil prices are predicted to drop from $81 per barrel this year to $73 next year. With Russia heavily reliant on energy exports, this decline poses a significant fiscal challenge, especially as the country funnels resources into its military-industrial complex. Experts warn that while military spending may sustain short-term growth, it comes at the expense of other industries, risking long-term stagnation. Economists also caution that Russia's economy has reached its capacity limits, with production running at over 80% utilization, an unprecedented high. Some experts describe the situation as a ticking time bomb.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. Let's start with what the Kremlin wants you to see. Russia's economy grew 3.6% last year. Unemployment is shockingly low at 2.4%, and wages are rising. It's like the economic equivalent of a social media filter. It looks flawless, but zoom in and you will see the cracks forming. Most of these booming numbers come from what economists called military Keynesianism. Translation: the Kremlin is pumping money into defense like a caffeinated teenager into a vending machine. Sure, this has created jobs, some 500,000 new positions in defense, 180,000 in the armed forces, and thousands more in paramilitary groups. However, none of this helps the civilian economy, which is struggling harder than a cat trying to get out of a bathtub. Essentially, Russia has built an economic house of cards, and the wind is starting to blow. Now, let's talk weapons, specifically artillery barrels. Russia is losing around 320 tank and artillery barrels a month. But guess how many they can produce? 20. Yes, 20. They are scraping Soviet-era stockpiles and buying from North Korea, but even that won't last. By mid-2025, Russia will face catastrophic shortages of key weapon systems, unless China swoops in with some miracle barrels. And spoiler alert, Beijing has bigger things to worry about than Moscow's cannon problem. Here's the thing. Even if Russia could keep producing weapons, it's running out of people to make them. With full employment, defense firms and the military are locked in a hiring war that's driving wages and inflation sky high. Worse still, this military spending binge is suffocating Russia's civilian economy. Small and medium-sized businesses can't find workers because everyone's busy building bombs or fighting on the front lines. And with interest rates at 21%, good luck getting a loan to start, well, anything. Now, you might be thinking, well, just stop spending on the military. The only problem is demobilizing would spark a massive recession. Imagine hundreds of thousands of unemployed veterans and defense workers, angry and unemployed. So what is left? More war. Historically, regimes with bloated militaries often resort to aggression to sustain themselves. Napoleon did it, Saddam Hussein did it, and Putin, well, Russia's already eyeing Ukraine's natural resources and the Black Sea's gas reserves. The Kremlin might trade full-scale war for strategic aggression, threatening neighbors to extract rents. It's conquest as a business model, a terrifyingly unsustainable business model at that. That being said, the end of this war won't mean the end of West's problems with Russia. If anything, a struggling, militarized Russia could become even more dangerous. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Wojciech Jakubik, energy industry analyst. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
My pleasure, great to be here.
So before we get started with the Russian economy, let's talk about the energy sector for just a moment, because it actually connects to the whole attritional warfare aspect. An unprecedented attack has taken place. Much of the Ukrainian energy grid has once again been damaged, further reducing the country's energy capacity. Why do you think this is happening now, at this very moment during the war?
So there are two theories connected to this event. The first one is that it is plain and obvious that Russians made the new supplies of rockets ready. So they gathered the supplies for several weeks after big strikes in October, and now they are releasing those reserves, attacking Ukraine once again. The other theory is that it could be somehow connected to ATM-CMS agreement with US. We know that Washington agreed to let Ukraine use American weapons to strike targets inside Russia. So that might be some kind of answer from this imperial regime. In its very substance, Russians are using policy also to terrorize Ukrainian citizens. We know that Ukrainian electroenergetic system lacks like 13 gigawatts of capacity, which is necessary to sustain energy supplies through the winter. We have the heating season on. It started in November, and Ukrainians will have greater and greater issues with delivering energy, electricity, and also heat.
So there is going to be more misery for Ukrainian civilians, especially as Russia is trying to use this window of opportunity right ahead of the possible negotiations, which the new US President, Donald Trump, has actually been talking about for quite a while. Now, let's move on to the Russian economy. Would you say that the economy of Russia right now is a dead man walking?
Well, it is an economy of a country which has like 18 months of sustainability, and then they will have a breakdown like they had after the Afghan war. Of course, Russia is providing the economy with money, but it is only because of printing. Ruble is like 1/100th of dollar. $1 is 100 rubles right now, and it is an official exchange. Unofficial exchange is even worse from the point of view of Russian currency. Russians are burning their reserves. Of course, they got billions of dollars, gold, different currencies to be burned, but they are burning them effectively. And by doing so, they are increasing the cost of money in their economy. We have record high rates when it comes to the credits and mortgages. The economy of this country is only showing some growth because of military expenditure. Almost 40% of expenditure from Russia is going for the military sector. So all they produce are tanks and everything that is connected to war. So when it comes to a normal, civilized economy, they get nothing to show. And if they try to sustain this model for longer, they will repeat the scenario from Afghanistan. And Afghanistan was the beginning of an end of Soviet Union. I wish that it would be the same with Russian Federation this time.
So while Russia is busy manufacturing tanks, the civilian economy itself is tanking, if you excuse the pun. But the big question is, for how long can it last? Because we've often had this sort of wishful thinking. Some analysts in the West, even in 2022, were predicting, oh, there is going to be a huge crisis. The economy will start to crumble. And after that, there will be social unrest and even possibly a change at the Kremlin. Well, unfortunately, nothing like that has ever happened. So the question is, would you say that there is a big difference between short term, like you've mentioned, 18 months, but also what happens after that? Because there were also some predictions released recently that economic growth will basically plunge to like a 1.2, 1.4% level, something like this. And Russia will be lagging behind not just developed countries, but also its fellow BRICS countries like China and India quite substantially. So would you say that for the time being, this is working, but later on, Putin has effectively, he basically condemned the economy to a gradual collapse later on?
Yeah, so GDP is only one factor, and most of this GDP we see in Russia right now is connected to the military expenditures, so it is nothing sustainable. It is not connected to real economy, to normal people lives. The hardest part is this unrest in Russia. We don't see a big unrest when it comes to the civic society in Russia. We see greater repercussions when it comes to the oppositions to independent institutions which are under attack in Russia. So we cannot be sure if we will have some implosion in Russia. But looking from the economic perspective, prolonging the sanctions, deepening the sanctions will provide us with further results of our policy, because we are in totally different place that we've been 3 years ago. It needs to be underlined that Kremlin wanted to take over Kyiv in 3 days, and we are after 3 years of big war in Ukraine, and Kremlin did not reach any goal of its policy. Instead, it has lost the European gas market. It is more and more dependent on Chinese, Indian customers, and it is a major power that is crumbling. So after this war, no matter what is the result, Russia will cease to become the major power it wanted to be. It won't ever be an empire that was dreamed by Putin and other oligarchs. This country is going to fail economically, and this country will become a minor partner in relations, especially with China.
But for the time being, they are dodging our sanctions. They are still maintaining a revenue from oil. And also, you've mentioned that the war economy, essentially, is now the massive flywheel for the entire industry. So effectively, Russia is incentivized to continue the war. It has no incentive to stop the war, because then you could actually have people once again being made redundant, no more work to be done in these massive industrial facilities. The military production will go down possibly at some point. So this could be a problem. Do you think that Russia is going to continue the war just for the sake of keeping its economy afloat?
Russia has no choice, because Russia has nothing else to provide economically. It is losing the hydrocarbon market. It is trying to diversify away from Europe and the Western Hemisphere. It is not happening to full extent, especially in natural gas sector. And you can see that from record high revenue drop when it comes to Gazprom. So Russia might be willing to, it might be incentivized to sustain the warfare activity, but in fact, according to analysts, it is lacking the potential to sustain it for more 2 years, 3 years. It is this Afghan
But it's still a long
scenario.
time, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a long time. Everything depends on.
Would you say this is like, damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation for Putin?
Well, Vladimir Putin is just a face of a whole system that is under threat of implosion because of what is happening in Ukraine. Sustained effort from the West could provide a result, which is changing power in Russia. Not exactly, maybe not a democratic revolution, but some change that is making Russia more interested in its own situation, economic development, and so on, not looking for lands outside of its borders.
But does the West have the resolve to do that? That is the big question. So far, there have been many signals that the West doesn't really want Russia to lose because it is afraid of the possible chaos. So in the end, we end up with Ukraine being drip-fed weapons, not being able to win, not really allowed to lose. So do you think this is going to continue? Because in that case, the West will have missed a massive opportunity, as you're suggesting.
Well, I don't see any solution that will make it happen that we have a peace agreement in 3 months, like it was said in White House. Donald Trump said that he needs only 3 days to make the peace happen between Ukraine and Russia. I don't believe in it because it is too tough to resolve this conflict. Such freeze on the ground is actually a threat to the West because Russia will have more resources to allocate in different directions, not only Ukraine. And you see strange accidents in Baltic Sea, in Northern Sea. You have sabotage that was proved to be perpetrated by Russians. So if we let Russia get another breath in Ukraine, they will have more resources to attack us directly, and it is happening already. So the scale will only increase. So if someone is willing to avoid chaos, he needs to stop Russia.
So, of course, the question is, because Russia is saying we don't really want to freeze the conflict. Also, you're suggesting Russia cannot afford to freeze the conflict now because its economy would essentially grind to a screeching halt. So can you imagine situations whereby...
They can freeze the country because they will have a pause to, update.
But the question is this.
Adjust.
Do you think that Donald Trump is going to say, okay, we're going to freeze the conflict? Ukraine is going to say, well, we don't want to, but we can, if necessary. But Russia is going to say, well, we don't want to, and we can because of our economy, so we have to keep it going. And then Trump might say, okay, so how about lowering oil prices, increasing production in the US, driving oil prices down? Do you think that this is going to be the pin that's going to essentially cause this, overinflated Russian economy to pop like a balloon in the end?
So this drill, baby, drill policy is a done deal, I believe. Looking at nominations in White House, the energy secretary, which is coming from the hydrocarbon sector, Mark Rubio, who is a hawk among Republican politicians, they all want to send as much American oil and gas as possible to the market. So it is going to happen under this administration, no matter what Russia does. It could hamper Russian influence over the markets. It could decrease the prices. It is objectively good from the perspective of Western world because we will decrease dependence not only on Russia, but for example on Saudi Arabia, which is also creating troubles lately. So it is a good part, but it won't stop Russia in Ukraine because they invade no matter what. They are continuing their activity. The worrying part is that they will allow Russia to regroup, to change the logistics, to adjust to this situation, to be more effective in Ukraine. And that is the Minsk III scenario that we in the West are afraid of, that we will just let Russia get a breeze and then they will go back to the invasion and they will finish what they started in February 22. The alternative is to sanction Russia more, and Marco Rubio nomination is giving us some hope that US will further sanction Russia. Marco Rubio was one of the brains behind the Nord Stream 2 sanctions, which were a bipartisan effort in US. So I hope it is not agreed yet to give Ukraine to Russia.
So after all, Russia tends to say, well, your sanctions don't work, but they also say the fundamental precondition for any sort of deal is to get these sanctions as far away as you can. So it means that, well, when they say they don't work, they're not really telling the whole truth, to say the least.
What they say is totally different.
Certainly is. That certainly is. Wojciech Jakubik was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you too.
And now it's time to move on to Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Experts warn that if Ukraine successfully strikes North Korean units near Russia's Kursk region, it could influence Kim Jong-un's decision to send more troops. Beijing, meanwhile, has urged for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine.
The US's decision to allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles on Russian territory could potentially affect North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's military strategy. According to Valery Ryabik, a military expert and development director at Defense Express, Pyongyang may consider deploying more troops to Russia's Kursk Oblast if Ukrainian forces successfully target North Korean units. China, meanwhile, has urged an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine, stressing that it is in the best interest of all parties. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian emphasized that de-escalating the conflict is the most urgent priority, reaffirming Beijing's neutral stance. The US decision marks a significant shift, as Western nations had previously restricted Ukraine's use of long-range weapons like ATACMS to avoid escalating tensions. Military experts have suggested this development could prompt additional international involvement, including potential actions by North Korea.
Two undersea fiber optic cables in the Baltic Sea, one linking Finland and Germany and another connecting Lithuania to Sweden, have been severed, prompting suspicions of sabotage. The incidents echo past cases of potential malicious damage in the region, including the Nord Stream pipeline explosions in 2022.
The Finland-Germany cable, spanning 1,200 kilometers, stopped working early Monday, while a 218-kilometer link between Lithuania and Sweden's Gotland island failed the previous day. Finnish and German authorities expressed deep concern and stated the incidents raised suspicions of deliberate damage amid growing fears of hybrid warfare tied to the war in Ukraine. Repairs to the Finland-Germany cable could take up to 15 days, while investigations continue into whether the damage to both cables was accidental or intentional. The Baltic Sea remains a critical infrastructure zone for Europe, with its security increasingly under scrutiny.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Lewiński. Bye for now.